So let's first of all just quickly give this a crop. So I just want mainly this part to be here. And now let's go to our masking. And straight away, you're going to notice something, which is that the masks that we get, remember, for the person, and then it distributes the different masks according to the different elements. They're not always perfect. Okay, so sometimes that's also going to happen. So you can see it has now recognized the person. So if I just hit this, you're going to get those separate masks that we get here. So you can see if I wanted to mask out the skin, like just like we've seen before, right? Even for eyes and all. But if I go to clothes, you can see that we mainly want to change the red outfit here. But if I go to clothes, it also selects the bottom part, right? So that's all right, because now you know that you can always use a manual brush to subtract from this also, okay? So it's okay if we select the entire clothes, but we'll be looking at slightly, kind of a more in-depth look in how to do this if you have to remove something. Because last time our focus was more on layer masking, okay? So you can just hit and create this clothes mask. So we've got this. Also, there's going to be one important thing that you have to know here, which we didn't cover last time. So let's make this change, okay? And by the way, I don't want to see this overlay right now, so I can always uncheck this show overlay, okay? So I know that, yes, this is selected. That's all it's telling us. But let's just quickly go down, first of all, to our hue slider. And remember, so let's just revise this. This is a 14-bit image, so no problem with the bit depth. That's not a problem. So we can even afford to go a bit on the extreme, but we've already learned that using an analogous color scheme is better. So we're not going to venture too far. So let's say we do a bit of this. I think this looks really good. It still maintains the quality. Also, just it's a shade very close to the original shade. So from red to something like yellow. Now, anytime you're working with this new window that comes up after you open this mask, in this case, the clothes mask, you can see that we also have some other options here. It's not just the color change, right? So we can also do a lot of stuff, like maybe we want to turn down the highlights a bit. So, just get more detail from it, right? So if you actually see this, we do this, that can also just help us, though this is not directly related to the color aspect of things, but we've already seen, right? Sometimes when you change these colors, it can change the brightness, right? That's because we learned in blending modes, it's adding new pixels here. And here in Camera Raw, you can't really change directly the blending mode, okay? So for that, you'll have to take it back over to Photoshop. So that's not a problem, because you always don't have to change the blending mode. I mean, if the output that you're getting is okay, that's perfectly fine. So in this case, just we can turn down the highlights a bit. That's all, just to get the original. You can always hit the before and after. So you can see here. In fact, we might have just slightly made it darker, but that's okay. We're getting more detail here. That's the main part. And sometimes when I'm doing this, I also like to work on these effects so I can increase the clarity a bit. The best part is we've basically made a selection on the basis of color, so it's only working on that area. So I do this usually a lot when my client is wearing a leather jacket, for example. So, you really want to get the contrast out on the pixels. So this clarity slider really helps. And if there's good texture, you can also increase the texture. So texture usually works on smaller edges that you're seeing. So like these smaller squares that you're seeing on the outfit, it's going to work more on that, okay? Clarity usually works on the bigger edges, so just see. But don't go overboard, because then it doesn't look good. So we just want to tone this down a bit. And texture is like a smaller mini clarity. It's just going to add on the little edges, okay? So now if we just slightly zoom out and check the before after, just go here. You can see, right, this looks really good. The only thing is, as we're going to soon learn, this mask was not very accurate. It has come a bit on his neck. We'll soon be correcting that. There's some other things also. You can add some more sharpness. If there was noise in your shot, it'll get reduced wherever this mask was, and all these things. So you can see, right, this looks good. Now here, we need to modify the mask a bit. And sometimes it's tough to see whether this mask is accurate or not. Like sometimes you really have to zoom in and you can see that this has happened, but you easily might miss something like this out, okay? So this is where the show overlay button that initially was switched on comes into play. But even when this is switched on, sometimes you just don't see this properly, right? So there's a very cool option here in this next to the show overlay. First of all, you can even change the color. That can also help you. So maybe I can select a different color instead of red. Okay, that can help me. But there's a nice option here which says image on black. Okay, and just see this. The moment I hit this, I really like this because this exactly shows what the selection was, and it basically removes everything else. Almost looks a bit scary, okay? But if we zoom in, now can you see that we're able to exactly see which part was, messed up basically, right? So here, for example, now I can take a subtraction brush. So I can select a manual brush here. Okay, I get this. I can decrease the size a bit. This we've already seen how to do this in the last time we were inside Camera Raw. Basically, you get all your options here of this new brush. Or you can use the square bracket keys also. And when you're working around these hard edges, it's a good idea to just decrease this feathering a bit so that the edges are hard. Because you can see, right, this edge is hard and we don't want to be too soft here. Otherwise, it'll just mix at the edge. So, decrease that. We're basically just removing that part. It's a good way to just see this, right? And here, if I just hide this, you can see, right, there's some parts here which we can see the original red color from here, right? So we can just paint that back in. So we can add a brush because this time we need to add. So this brush is for adding, and we can now add here. You can see this part was not selected at all. So we're just gonna add this. And maybe, but there still is going to be an issue, okay? Which is that if I zoom out a bit, can you see that on these edges, we still have that original red color? Why is this happening, okay? Now, here's the thing. Do you see this amount slider? So if I go back to our original mask, and I make sure that this is selected, which is person one close, because this is where we change the color. You have this very, harmless looking slider which says amount and it's set to 100, and you feel like, yeah, that's it. Because normally when something is set to 100, you know that things are not messed up. So we can ignore this. But in Camera Raw, things are just a bit different, okay? It works like this. So we made a selection, and we get this slider for this mask, which is basically like an intensity, or you can call it amount. And Camera Raw knows, or Photoshop knows, that most people are going to be making a lot of changes here. Like, people are not just using this mask, usually in a lot of cases. So this course is about changing of the color only. So we've been mainly keeping our focus on that. But a lot of times when people create a mask like this, just like I changed the other things, right? Highlights, clarity, a lot of people change a lot of things at this stage, not just the color. They even change the brightness, clarity, texture, and all these things. And Photoshop knows this. So it's a way of saying that, you know what, we're just going to keep this slider in between. That means whatever you do with these sliders here, it's actually this is more like a 50% effect. Even though it says 100, but can you see the sliders in between? It's kind of Photoshop's way of restricting people from going overboard with these settings, right? Just think of it like this, that they're just kind of, as a precautionary measure, even though it says 100, this is actually 50% of whatever we are doing here. Because if we increase this and make it to double its amount, we basically push the slider all the way here, that's when whatever we did here with everything comes into full play, okay? So just see this. If I zoom out a bit, and let's keep an eye out on these red edges, okay? So think of it like this. We changed from red to yellow, but this 100 is actually not a full effect. That's why we can still see the red, okay? But just see, if I increase it to all the way to 200, you can see that this basically disappears. That's because now whatever we did with this has come into full effect. The mask, yes, it creates a nice mask. The mask doesn't change because of this. It has no relationship with the mask. But what happens on that mask, like whatever the settings change, the changes that we're making, that will only come into full effect if this is set to full. And you can see, right, according to me, this is not a great idea by Adobe, because a lot of people can just assume 100 to be full effect, right? And they may not move the slider, but this is what you have to do if you want the full effect, okay? So especially when you change the color, this is important that this is set to the full effect, the 200 in this case, so that we are simply not seeing the original color. So just remember that. So that's one of the reasons I kind of made this video, okay? And also, we can just probably go down here. Don't want this effect on his hand here. So maybe let's just decrease the size a bit. All right. This is our minus brush. Remember the first brush? I just selected that. Okay, maybe even here. Looks like his hand, but actually that was a part of the dress, because you can see it kind of was too reddish. So yeah, that's the hand. And if we go down, remember his trousers were actually also a part of the selection, but doesn't really matter, because now you know what is the color here. Pretty much white. Does white have saturation? We've already learned in blending modes. No. So whatever we did really did not affect this anyway. Otherwise, like, you can just take your, like, take basically the first brush, right? That was the minus brush, and just like start removing it the same way. I'm not going to do it because in this case, now we know this hasn't affected, since white doesn't really have any color. And now if we just move the overlay, we're starting to get a much better looking and accurate selection.